Scientific advances allow us to research and understand most things that we find in the world, but there are some that remain a complete mystery.
I'm a little worried about.
Some are natural phenomena, but more bizarrely, there are a number of items that were created by humans throughout history that today we have no idea what they were for or how they were made. Get ready for a world of intrigue as we look at 15 mysterious objects that science can't explain. Number 15. The Tutankhamun Mystery. The discovery of Tutankhamun's almost perfectly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 was one of the greatest archaeological finds ever. What lay inside has taught us so much about a little-known period of the ancient Egyptian empire, but with all the answers it provided, there are an equal number of mysteries. The most unexplained questions surrounding the Boy King are about why he died at such a young age, and what his life was like when he was alive. Scans of his remains have shown he suffered from a number of illnesses, such as epilepsy, a cleft palate, and a club foot, as well as signs of bone necrosis, scoliosis, and even signs of malaria. Most of these conditions are believed to have been the result of the incestuous relationships of the Egyptian ruling class, and would have meant he was a frail, sickly boy who would have struggled to take on the role of pharaoh. It's not thought that he died because of these, though, and the circumstances around his death are still hotly contested by academics. A skull fracture could indicate he was bludgeoned, but there were also missing ribs and parts of his chest wall. Some have suggested he may have perished after falling from a horse, or during a sports match, and because of his already weakened state, he was unlikely to have been able to recover from any serious injuries. Before we go on, we have a cool challenge for y'all that will take 5 seconds to complete. Let's make a deal. Just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and you will get 10 years of amazing luck and fortune. Try it, it actually works. Number 14. Mari Man. Geoglyphs are large carvings and pieces of art that are formed in the ground, and people have been creating them for thousands of years. They can be found across the world and are mysterious because their full glory can only be seen from high above. And it's not entirely clear what cultures who had no ability to view them from the air had for them. One of the most impressive is known as the Mari Man, and is about 37 miles to the west of the town of Mari in South Australia. It's the image of a person who looks to be hunting with either a boomerang or a stick, and is much bigger than you'd think from looking at images. He stands 1.7 miles tall and covers an area of around 620 acres. It was first noticed in 1998, and it was soon claimed that its form shares similarities with the Artemision bronze that had been recovered from the Adric Sea in 1928. Does this mean that whoever made the bronze also made the geoglyph? The chances of this are unlikely, and despite not knowing for certain who was responsible for creating the Mari Man, the current belief is that it is actually relatively new, having been carved within the last 50 years, and an artist called Bardius Goldberg, who died in 2002, is the lead suspect. Number 13. Viking Sword. The Vikings were well known for their exploration and plundering of faraway lands, and while they were certainly well equipped when they went on those voyages, there have been discoveries that suggest they were far more technologically advanced than anyone could have imagined. The most important weapon of a Viking was their sword, and although most that have been found are fairly primitive, there are around 170 known as the Ulfberht swords that were ahead of their time. They are thought to have been forged between the 8th and 11th centuries and all have an inscription on their blades. For a long time it was unclear what this meant, but it's now believed to be a name that became synonymous with the specific design of sword. On average, they're around 36 inches long and weigh up to 3 pounds and are made mainly from steel. Examples that have been found have mainly been uncovered across Northern Europe, and they're some of the most valuable Viking treasures of all. Researchers and metal detectorists hope they'll be the ones to find the next, and possibly one day may find where they had been forged or blueprints that could unlock the secrets behind them. Number 12. The Koh-i-Noor Diamond. As part of the British Crown Jewels, the Koh-i-Noor is a diamond that weighs 105.6 carats, which makes it one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. It was given to Queen Victoria in 1849, but its history before this is somewhat mired in controversy and mystery. It had been a part of the Mughal Peacock Throne, a ceremonial throne that was covered in hundreds of jewels and is thought to be cursed because of the amount of fighting that's occurred over it. Since being in the possession of the British royal family, only women have ever worn it, because it's said to bring certain death to any man that touches it. The first records of the diamond come from the 14th century, and it's not even clear where it was mined. It's believed to have come from the Kolar mine on the banks of the Krishna River in India, but who the first owner of the gem was is unknown. It had been held by rulers leading wars for centuries, such as the invasion of the southern Indian kingdoms in the 1300s, and the invasion of Delhi in 1739. Could it be true that the magnificent rock truly does come with a curse? And, if so, what might happen if this curse were to be reawakened someday? Number 11. The Devil's Bible Mystery. The Codex Gigas, more commonly known as the Devil's Bible, is a manuscript that dates back to the 13th century. At 36 inches long, it's the biggest ancient text in the world, and is thought to have been written by the Benedictine monk in a monastery in what is the Czech Republic today. The writing inside is pretty much what you'd expect from a religious text of the time, and contains a complete version of a Latin translation of the Bible, as well as a number of other works. What's particular about this tome, though, is that on the 290th page, there is no writing, but what appears to be a description of the devil. On the page opposite is a representation of heaven, and since the discovery of the Codex, researchers have been at odds about what this is meant to mean. Some think it's just the juxtaposition of good versus evil, but others are convinced that it's a sign from the monks in the monastery that they were either devil worshippers or that they believed the devil was more connected with the kingdom of heaven than mainstream religion would want anyone to think. We may never truly know what the intent of the author was, but it remains one of the most unique and potentially controversial religious works ever found. Number 10. The Voynich Code. We don't know who the author of the Voynich manuscript was, nor do we know when it was written, but the earliest records we have are from the 17th century alchemist in Prague who wrote of this strange book that was taking up space in his library. In recent years, the pages have been studied in much greater detail, and it's just as baffling today as it has ever been. It has more than 240 pages, some of which fold out and contains hundreds of images and text on every page. The strange thing, though, is that the writing is in no known language, and despite cryptographers trying to make sense of it for more than 100 years, none of the pages have yet been deciphered. Some of the images are of complex biological themes and astronomical depictions, but again, it's impossible to know what the purpose of these are. Nor is it clear how so much detail was known in the 15th century when it's thought to have been written. One day the book may finally be decoded, and it could contain secrets and mysteries that'll represent a step forward in our understanding of the topics. Or maybe it was just the nonsensical ramblings of someone who simply wanted to create a puzzle for the future. Number 9. Sumerian King List. Thousands of amazing and strange artifacts have been found in Iraq, thanks to its rich history. But there's perhaps none as unusual as the Sumerian King List, a text written in ancient Sumerian that supposedly details of the kings of the Sumer civilization. The difficulty with using this as a historical resource, however, is that it appears to blend fact with fiction. Some of the earlier names that are mentioned are generally thought to be mythical rulers, and many of them are stated to have been leaders for many thousands of years. There are also some dynasties that we know ruled the region but aren't mentioned in the Sumerian King List, so there are questions about what it actually is. Is it a form of revisionist history with the rulers the author didn't like being left out, or does it actually signal the names we thought were from legend were real people after all, and that the other resources we use to learn about the Sumerian civilization are, in fact, the ones that are wrong? Number 8. The Stone of Scone. Also known as the Stone of Destiny, the Stone of Scone is a 26 by 16.7 by 10.5 inch stone that for centuries was used in the coronation ceremonies of Scottish monarchs. It's made from red sandstone, weighs 335 pounds, and has a cross inscribed onto one side and 2 iron rings to make it easier to lift. It was originally on the grounds of the monastery of Scone. but was moved to Westminster Abbey in 1296 after Edward I successfully led the war against the Scots. In the 1950s, a group of Scottish students managed to steal it from the abbey and return it to Scotland, but in the process, managed to break it in half. It's now kept with the Crown Jewels of Scotland, and there are plans to house it in its own display at the Perth Museum, but there remains mystery over its origin, and even its provenance. Legends tell of the first King of Scotland bringing the stone over from Ireland for his coronation ceremony, while there are also theories that it may actually be the Stone of Jacob that was mentioned in Genesis 28. There have long been suggestions that countless replicas were made from a quarry near Scone, and it's even thought that the one that was in Westminster Abbey for hundreds of years may not have been the original, despite tests proving it was red sandstone from Scotland. If the stone's origins were further afield, it would prove that the English king has actually stolen a forgery. Number 7. Bubsby's Stoop Chair Mystery. In 1702, notorious British murderer Thomas Bubsby was executed by hanging after having been convicted for the murder of his father-in-law following a dispute over money. When the police came for him, Bubsby was sitting on a chair in a pub near where he would eventually be gibbeted. And according to witnesses, he muttered a curse that he was being led away. The old oak chair became something of a local legend, thanks to his association with it. But in the 20th century, it became associated with another series of deaths. During the Second World War, a squadron of Canadian airmen went for drinks in the pub, and those that sat on the chair never returned from their next bombing campaign. There were a series of traffic accidents in the next decades linked to people who had also sat in it. And there was a vicious murder in the mid-1970s that was connected to the chair too. Worried that there may indeed be a curse, the pub owner donated it to a nearby museum, where it is now suspended from the ceiling to prevent visitors from taking a risk and sitting on it. While scientists have been unable to prove one way or another if this really was Bubsby's demonic throne, would you risk sitting on it yourself? Number 6. The Piri Reis Map. Today we have extremely detailed maps of the world thanks to centuries of exploration and the advent of satellite imaging. But there's a map that dates back to 1513 that was created by an Ottoman admiral called Piri Reis, and it's unbelievably accurate, especially considering the technology that was available at the time. He said that he made it using a map from Columbus that has been lost to time, and 10 Arab and 4 Indian sources. Only about a third of the map has survived over the centuries, but this piece shows Europe and North Africa in very good detail, and some surprising other coastlines, including what some believe to be Antarctica. The problem with this, however, is that Piri Reis drew the map just 21 years after Columbus supposedly traveled to the Americas for the first time. How would it be possible for people of the time to know the existence of Antarctica, let alone draw accurate representations of it? Furthermore, if it does show Antarctica, it shows it without the full covering of ice, and since we know it's been a frozen continent for hundreds of thousands of years, could this be evidence that a human civilization was present on the continent far, far earlier than we previously thought? Number 5. The Mystery of the Easter Island Heads. Easter Island is a remote place in the Pacific Ocean, but it has been home to people since at least the 13th century. While most of the ancient remains that have been found on the island are pretty much what you'd expect, there's one major difference: the presence of nearly 1,000 monumental statues in the shape of heads. They line the coast and are present inland too, but how they were made and why remains a mystery.
You do dum-dum, you give me gum-gum.
They are thought to have been carved by the Rapa Nui people between 1250 and 1500, and the engineering required to make them and place them in position is unbelievable. The moai, as they're called, are up to 30 feet tall, and the heaviest weighs around 90 tons. They were carved at a quarry inland and transported into place, a process that would have required the combined effort of hundreds of people. Each one represents the face of a deity, and their heads are almost half the size of the entire statue. They're possibly the most famous and amazing historic monuments found anywhere in the world, and continue to surprise and delight people to this day, despite the mystery that surrounds them. Number 4. The Mystery of the Sailing Stones in Death Valley. Visitors to Death Valley in California expect to confront extreme temperatures and hostile conditions. But there's also a strange phenomenon that takes place here and has long confused scientists and visitors alike. Known as the sailing stones, people have found rocks in the sand of the desert with long trails behind them, suggesting that they have somehow moved across the land by themselves with no signs of footprints or tire tracks. How could this possibly be? The first documented accounts of these strange stones were written in 1915, and, as you can imagine, various theories were put forward to explain how this was happening. In subsequent years, people have suggested it could be the work of aliens or even of underground creatures, but recently a more scientific explanation has been put forward. The current thinking is that under very specific conditions, the region becomes covered in ice at night. When it melts, the water pushes the stones along the sand and leaves the tracks behind them. This isn't a definitive solution, however, and requires more research. So for the moment, this is a mystery that is yet to be comprehensively solved. Number 3. Cocaine mummies. When do you think people first crossed the Atlantic, and trade between South America, Europe, and Africa first began? Usually the answer is following Columbus voyages in the 15th century, or possibly evidence that the Vikings traveled across to modern-day Canada. But there's the increasing possibility that the ancient Egyptians traveled far further around the world than previously thought. In 1976, an archaeologist studying an Egyptian mummy found traces of tobacco on its bandages. She claimed this was evidence that the crop had made its way over far longer ago than anyone had believed. But she was buried within the scientific community amidst claims that her sample had simply been contaminated. Several years later, though, samples were taken from inside a mummy and traces of cannabis, cocaine, and tobacco were found in the body cells. By the 90s, several mummies had been confirmed to contain the substances, and since they originated in South America, this is increasingly being seen as proof that worldwide trade was introduced many thousands of years ago, instead of hundreds that the history books tell us. Number 2. Damascus Sword. We like to think that our knowledge today is an accumulation of everything mankind has learned, but occasionally archaeologists find something that's impossible to recreate today, with one of the most well-known cases being Damascus steel swords. They were forged in Syria from Wootz steel that had been imported from India and were renowned for their strength, shatter resistance, and the ability to sharpen them like no other. They were said to be able to cut a strand of hair that fell over the sword's edge, but since the mid-19th century, the knowledge of how to create them was lost. And even without an understanding of metallurgy, there was nowhere on Earth that could create them today. What's even more surprising is how meticulous and complicated their structure actually is. A team of scientists scanned the steel and found it to contain carbon nanotubes and nanowires, technology that's far beyond what was believed possible at the time. Could it be that they had techniques to fashion the blades that created these structures without the need of having an understanding of the molecular level? Or were people at the time far more advanced than we realized? Number 1. Antikythera Mechanism Mystery. In 1900, a team of sponge divers near the Greek island of Antikythera found a long-lost shipwreck at a depth of 148 feet. With the assistance of the Hellenic Royal Navy, and began to retrieve artifacts from what turned out to be a Roman cargo ship. But one item stood out among the rest. It's referred to as the Antikythera mechanism, and it took a year before researchers realized it contained a gear. And that was just the beginning of the mysteries that this discovery would lead to. It's now thought to be the first known example of a computer, albeit one that was very different to what we think of today. It was hand-operated, and likely predicted astronomical patterns and eclipses, with the ability to project decades in advance. There are also suggestions it could have been used to accurately track events over a number of years, such as the ancient Olympic Games and certain religious rituals. The problem, though, is that something this complicated is simply not meant to have existed during the Roman times, both for its complexity in design and the information it could calculate. In its entirety, it had more than 30 moving parts, each dish which tracked individual objects like the moon or the planets in our solar system. Thought to have been originally created by the Greeks, this was a device that was far ahead of its time, and the knowledge needed to make it was lost for thousands of years afterward. Which of these did you find to be the most surprising? And have you got your own suggestions for how to solve the mysteries? Make sure to let us know in the comments section. Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on the screen right now. See you next time.